Achtung. Welcome to We Have Ways of Making You Talk with me, Al Murray, and James Holland. James returned from parts foreign, cooped up in his Wiltshire bunker. You've been to the US, to the archive, to Germany, to their somewhat. I mean, in a way,
but always a joy.
Yeah, but it's sort of Sisyphean archive. It felt like
it's a very, very good word to describe it.
There's the strange riddle and conundrum to it. If you can't look at those files, yes, let me go and get them for you. You know, all that.
Yes, you can't photograph them if they're red, but they're all in red. Okay, well, photograph them then. It's so peculiar. It really is very, very weird.
And then you've been to Italy. Well, Sicily and then Italy. So you crossed the Straits of Messina.
Yes, I mean, I have done that before, but I just wanted that kind of that sense of, you know, last time I did it, we literally it was to the British Army, and we crossed over to the not the whole British Army, it's a very small proportion of the British Army. We went across and came straight back again, and it didn't really. I wasn't really feeling it, if I'm honest. And then I had David Cole's book. He was in the 5th Div. He was in the second Inniskillings, and he has this wonderful description of having to climb up to this village and this kind of track, and so I wanted to kind of sort of do that same thing and look back at the same view he had. And it was, it was absolutely one and the same place. So it was rather amazing to kind of to see that, and to say that, it's like all about sense of scale, isn't it? I think, and trying to get that sense of just how close is Sicily, and just how difficult would it have been to kind of stop the Germans and the Italians in their tracks as they crossed the Straits? And the answer is it would have been impossible. And anyone who goes there will see that absolutely, completely, immediately. But it is just simply impossible to stop them.
Yeah.
And to have a look at it, and lots of sort of, it was a beautiful evening. So all the mountains had that kind of lovely blue grey hazy kind of sort of Homeric kind of look to them, which was rather lovely. And also, I'd just never been into the toe of Italy at all. I'd just never been there at all.
So did you go to Taranto?
You went to Taranto, but we also went to. I was sort of quite closely following the Hasty Peas, the Hastings and Prince Edward Regiment, and Farley Mowat and all the rest of it. So we went to some of the places that they went to. And he talks about this sort of climbing up this Cretanza. And he talks about going up this windy road and then suddenly seeing this Italian kind of ambush waiting for them with a sort of 75mm anti-tank gun.
Yeah.
I'm pretty certain I found it because, he was talking about a hairpin. There was literally only one hairpin on this kind of route up.
Yeah.
And there was this sort of road cut out of a sort of, gorge, and it was right on the lip of a, and if I was going to place an anti-tank gun ambush, that is certainly where I'd have put it.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty sure that was it. And so that was interesting. And then we went all the way along the southern coast of Calabria to Taranto, which was just fascinating. But I've got to say, southern coast of Italy, just don't bother.
Really?
Absolutely horrible.
Really?
It was really gopping. Yeah. It was just like one town,
miserable town.
All senza speranza, all totally without hope.
Really?
Yeah, it was just really depressing. Single road. Just one town after another, and they were just all awful. There was no charm to them at all. There was no
the poverty of the South and all that, surely, rather than sort of some aesthetic life choices that have been made. Surely, Jim.
I'm sure that's true, but it still was horrible.
God,
you just wouldn't want to be there at all.
That's a shame.
It reminded me of sort of, dark corners of Tunisia.
Really?
Yeah, it really did. I was really surprised because I thought, oh God, it's a lovely coastal road. We're going to, hugging the arch of the foot of the boot, and not a bit of it. It was really hard work. It was hard work ride that took forever, and
that's interesting.
And then suddenly you're in this kind of haven of Taranto.
Well, I was going to say, is the scenery beautiful apart from the dreadful towns?
No.
Right, that's interesting.
No, it's like something out of an Ennio Morricone, out of a spaghetti western. It's
really?
Yeah, it's just really, really not attractive at all. It's not attractive countryside. It's not. And in fact, eventually we got to Crotone Airfield, which is where Becky Steinhoff goes to after he leaves Sicily.
Yeah, and they bug out of
Bloody
Sicily.
hell, that's another sort of sun-beaten, sun-blasted kind of eyesore that you just wouldn't really want to spend any time in.
Really?
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Really
Because there is I don't know, I would imagine this is surprising a lot of people. Surely southern Italy is all, La Bella Vita and all that, and it's all gorgeous, and but no.
No, but Taranto was lovely. I'll give it that. It's absolutely gulping. I went to Taranto. That was very, very interesting, which was beautiful. And it was fascinating to see how that all works as well, because you've got this big harbour, but then you've got these little islands, these two islands that sort of link. There's a kind of another kind of sort of loop.
Yeah.
And behind these two little islands is this kind of little, I suppose, lagoons almost.
Mm.
So the harbour is split into two bits. There's this sheltered bit on the other side of the island, and then there's the kind of bit that's facing out to the sea.
Yeah.
And when they did the attack in 1940, they were on both sides. The ships were on both sides.
Ah, right. Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
And you can see where they all, and see where they landed with slapstick.
Yes. Yes. I mean, slapstick is
all the paras. They're landing by land. By landing craft.
Yeah.
Or by ship. No landing crafts. They all landed.
Well, and one of the troop ships is sunk, and a load of guys are killed, aren't they?
Yeah.
Is it in fourth Para Brigade? I think.
Yes, exactly that. Yes, it's fourth Para Brigade who are new to battle.
Yes, who've been raised in Palestine from an Indian, from bits and pieces of the Indian Army. I mean, it's they're absolutely extraordinary, and their first action is slapstick, and the one of the ships gets sunk, and I think it's 150 guys are killed, something like that, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not as many. I think it's 150. Yeah, maybe in total. I think it's
in total
38.
Right,
barrels,
okay,
something like that, or 41 barrels. Or something
but I mean,
that was really interesting.
And you went all the way to Rome, right?
Went all the way to Rome, but the other place we saw where Hopkinson was killed.
Okay.
Yeah, so he's going on a road just north of. So basically, what they do is they then fan out on the 10th. And that accident happens. That tragedy happens on the 10th of September, the day after. It's a sort of reinforcement ship coming in.
Yeah,
and it hits a mine as it's mooring alongside.
That's right. Yeah,
the thing, and you can see exactly where all that took place and everything. And then they fan out and they spread north, and the Fallschirmjäger who were protecting the Taranto basically abandoned it.
Yeah.
And then move to the hills. And you can see exactly why they go where they go, because just north of Taranto, it's completely flat as a board. And suddenly it kind of rises up into these little hills. And obviously they're going to be on the hill with, the hilltop town where they can look down over the flat bit. And that makes complete perfect sense. And Hopkinson is in the leading patrol with the 4th Battalion.
Yes.
And runs into a machine gun ambush.
Yep.
Gets cut to pieces.
Yes, insists on going forward and all that.
Yeah, insists on going forward. I mean, you can't doubt his bravery and all the rest of it, but then it sort of flattens out again, all around Foggia. It's really, really interesting because you've got the Gargano Peninsula, which is this little sort of looks like a kind of a bunion sort of sticking off the edge of the Adriatic coast.
Yeah,
and that's really high. That's like a sort of massive mountain massive, but in between it's just completely flat as a board. And so the Foggia airfield complex is actually 13 airfields all around around Foggia.
Yeah.
And one of them is at Bari, which is 70 kilometres away or something.
From
Foggia.
Yeah.
So when people talk about Foggia, they're not talking about just Foggia the town. They're talking all around it. But I went to one which was still an Air Force base and got told off.
Yes, good.
You can't photograph this.
Good.
Okay. Why not? Well, I'm looking at some barbed wire, some wire fencing, and some huts. If I want to look at it a bit more closely, I'll go on Google Earth. I mean, it's just absurd.
Look, you've got to give people something to do, Jim. When you're and
this guy came off and he said, "Have you taken any photos?" I went, "No." And he said, "Because if you had, I'd have had to take your phone away from you." I was like, "Well, I haven't," and I hadn't as it happened. But
why?
But I mean, it's just bizarre. I mean, bizarre behaviour. It's almost like, give an Italian a uniform and suddenly he's got to kind of impose himself.
Yeah.
But why on earth would you not allow photographs of from the outside of an Air Force base?
Military security, Jim.
But what? What security?
Military security. I think understanding the military mindset is possibly lacking there a little, Jim.
Anyway, I then went to Amendola, which was fascinating. I mean, it is absolutely flat there.
You're doing this because you're writing this casino book. Although, I mean, you were saying last night on our live stream, and by the way, if I don't know if you're aware of this, if you're a new listener, we have this Patreon. We have ways of making you talk Patreon where extra stuff goes up, and some of the extra stuff that's gone up lately is Jim's sort of photo diary, and I know
my video diary.
I know photographs and videos of other people on holiday are possibly the nearest thing to torture that exists without resorting to electrodes but Jim's basically Jim's been putting up his photos and his impressions of the places he's been in Italy, and they're on our Patreon. So if you want to see what we're talking about, those are all there. If you want to,
I think I totted up all my videos yesterday. I took 76.
Yeah. So, but you were saying last night on the live stream, which is another thing our patrons, and I know I suddenly sound like I'm doing some hard sell, which I'm going to back off from in a minute. Basically, we discussed. You're writing this book about casino, but what you were saying last night is, having been there and having looked at it all again, the battle has started to tower over the landscape of the entire campaign in Italy in the winter of 43 into 44 and into the spring of 44. And actually, the sheer effort of what's going on all over that part of the peninsula, if only just the setting stuff up. I mean, it's in a way, it sort of reminds me a little of the way that, you know, the Rhine crossing, Vasti, sort of happens out of nowhere in some accounts. And
yes.
Or, you know, the sort of thumbnail sketch of suddenly the Allies are crossing the Rhine. And in the meantime, they've been, you know, as we know, they've been squaring off with Veritable and Blackcock and all this stuff to square off the flanks and to tidy up the shoulder and all that sort of stuff before they go over the Rhine. And in a way, the casino battle sort of gets told a bit like, has that sort of narrative prominence, the way the monastery does, and leaves out.
They just seem to arrive there in sort of January 1944.
That's sort of the kind of the point I'm making. And I mean, if nothing else, if you're a sapper, that's a ghastly affront to the efforts that have been going on since landing on mainland Italy. You know, since coming from Sicily, is that every single river has to be bridged.
Yeah, it really does, and there's lots and lots of them because, of course, where you have mountains, you have rivers. Yeah, and in Italy, they're trying to get to the sea as quickly as possible, and that means basically running at 90 degrees to the axis of the Allied advance.
Yeah,
and so that's the problem. So you just constantly got to cross them.
Yeah,
it's also an affront to anyone who's sort of dying crossing the Volturno.
Well, of course,
dying at Ortona, or dying at Castel di Sangro, or dying at some other godforsaken kind of hill in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah,
I mean, you are still struck, I think, going around Italy, of just how remote certain parts are. Yeah. You know, you can go. I mean, whoever knew there was a province called Molise? Never knew. I mean, you know, we've all heard of Tuscany and Umbria and, you know, all that kind of stuff, and Lazio. Yeah. But there's Molise. Okay, so that's right in the middle. That's where Campo Basso is. Right. And then you've got Abruzzo. And, you know, Abruzzo and Molise, they're just full of mountains and rivers and tiny towns that you've never heard of. And even now, the roads are really, really rough, really difficult to get to. And some of these places, they're just absolute total backwaters.
Yeah, well, but this is southern Italy, isn't it? This is the point.
It still is.
It's that northern Italy is, you know, that has never changed. It's that the north is. The north's rich, the middle's beautiful, and the south is hard done by. It's a sort of, you know, people talk about the north-south divide in this country, but it's the other, you know, it's, I think, arguably more extreme in Italy. I mean, it's far more extreme in Italy. And
well, it's been fascinating. It's been really, really, I mean, it was just so interesting to see such a huge and vast amount of different places, and such different landscapes. And actually, you know, even, you know, going from Foggia, you can see around Foggia, you can see the kind of the mountains in the distance, whether it be the Gargano Peninsula or whether it be the Abruzzi Mountains. Yeah. You can see them, but where you are is absolutely totally flat. So you can see why it's a kind of strategic Air Force, you know, ideal setting.
Yes.
Yeah. Which is why they spend so much time and effort setting up the 15th Air Force. That all seems very sensible and completely logical. But you can also see, you know, where you're kind of sort of following the lines of where the Hasty Peas went, for example.
Yeah.
It's just, you just think, oh my God, what are they doing here? I mean, it's just horrendous. But equally, you can also see why, the 1st Fallschirmjäger Division, for example, who were protecting Taranto, once that's gone, they just clear north of the Foggia. They're not going to stick around on the Foggia plain.
No.
Forget it. Go straight to the hills. So it looks like you're making quite a lot of ground.
Yeah.
But I have huge amount of sympathy for the people who for 8th Army for being criticised for being slow to catch up with 5th Army.
Yeah.
Because it's horrendous.
Yeah, I mean, I tell you what. While we're talking, what I've done is I've gone to Google Maps and I've switched to terrain view, right? Because
now you can see it.
The road map view is doesn't help. The terrain view is absolutely extraordinary,
isn't it?
Because, like you say, Jim, essentially the heel and then up to Foggia. Termoli on the coast there is essentially flat.
Yeah. It's quite a lot. Termoli comes straight out the sea and it rises very sharply onto a kind of like a lip.
And you've got the Parco Nazionale di Gargano, which is mountainous.
Yeah.
By Manfredonia, but to the northeast of Foggia, but from then on, it's all mountainous. The mountains sort of, mimic the shape of Italy.
Yes.
Almost completely. Rome is tucked in a plain away from obviously in the floodplain of the Tiber, beneath the mountains. So anywhere you want to get to that's of any political importance, and after all, we've talked before in the podcast about you're capturing cities for political reasons. Political strategic reasons you take a capital city, you've defeated that. In theory, you've defeated that country. And it's the thing. And the thing we talked about before with Barbarossa about the Germans unable to decide whether their job is to capture Moscow or to destroy the Red Army, and how they get in a tangle about what the objective of Barbarossa is. But you can see when looking at Google Maps,
yes,
that the places you want to get to are all ringed with mountains. So So what the hell are you supposed to do?
Well, I mean, if you tap in Sant Elia, ELIA, it will come up with various options. The one you want is Appianese.
Yep.
Okay, tap that in.
Campobasso. Yeah, I've got it. Yeah.
The Campobasso. Okay, and then look at that on Google Earth. Okay.
Deep. Yeah.
That is 700 meters up.
Yeah. Well, that's the interesting.
And it's just in the middle of nowhere, and the Hasty Peas take that.
Yeah, when you zoom up, or when you zoom out on that, you see the bigger mountains to the east and north, to the west and northwest, and you just sort of see the crinkle on the terrain map on normal Google. But then, like you say, when you actually see how tall those mountains are, how high those hills are, and also you could tell from the roads on the terrain map, because they're all zigzagging and wriggling that they're all going. They're all going up hillsides the way you have to. Obviously, we think of Rome of the Roman Empire as having delivered straight roads all over the world. Yeah. Well, Italy is not full of straight roads.
Well, it is around Latina, but that's
there are little bits. There are little bits where it is, and up the main sort of passes and floodplains. So if you look at where what's called the A1 now, which runs up to Rome from Naples, but even that, not on the coast. Even that's high up, and that will have taken a great deal of effort to build. I mean, it is really, really interesting that if you look at the map, the roads tell you the site, the pattern of the road tells you what the terrain's like.
Yeah, completely. But you look at that. You look at Sant'Elia, and then you see that little lake.
Yeah.
And the lake wasn't there. That's a reservoir that's been created since war. And then you look just on the other side, on the right hand side, the eastern side of the lake, you can see a little place called Celenza. Yeah. So that's captured by the Hasty Peas. Then they go down into the river valley, which is now a lake. They go up the other side. They get a place called Macchia Valfortore, which you can see. Then they get Sant'Elia Appianese. Yeah. And I promise you that all of those involve massive climbs, then drops, then climbs again. And Sant'Elia is this little village perched on this high plane, just with views forever. And it's just so insignificant. The futility of what they're doing really comes home. You just think, why is anyone giving up their life for Sant'Elia Pianesi, which is a perfectly respectable and nice place? There's nothing wrong with it at all. It's not like being on the Calabrian coast or anything. But it's so far from anywhere. And it's such a long way from Rome. And their kind of ultimate objective.
But this is the nature of the terrain, though. It's entirely defensible. The way you're going to the way you're going to proceed is obvious. I mean, that's the thing I find sort of, it's not a wide rolling. It's not this. I mean, what's really interesting about the Second World War and armour, for instance. In fact, I tell you what, let's take a break and we'll come back to this thought. We'll see you in a tick. Welcome back to Weird Ways to Make You Talk with me, Al Murray, and James Holland. Now, I was just about to have a sort of have a thought. You're
about to go off on a big thought.
Well, yes. I mean, obviously, the Allies are deploying armour in this battle. The Germans are too, but not to such an extent because they're resource poor, and they need their tanks in the kind of terrain that we think of tanks in, wide open spaces and all that sort of stuff. And that's the interesting thing about so much of the armoured fighting that happens in the Second World War does not happen under charge conditions that the cavalrymen would prefer, does it? I mean...
Well, except in the first half of 1942, but in North Africa.
Yes, exactly. But that's the very peculiar exception, isn't it?
Yes.
And after all, turns a load of people's heads as to what will still be possible with armour. And I think, because if you look at this terrain, even with cavalry, it might actually be more use than armor in a way, because they resort to mules rather than trucks for getting up and down these mountains. It just seems so. It seems this territory seems so alien from some of the sort of highfalutin ideas about warfare that get applied to the conduct of the Second World War. You know what I mean? Why aren't the Allies more dynamic with their armour in Italy? Well, because it's fucking impossible.
yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that I think is really interesting is that 8th Army going up, first 78th Division, and then followed by the Canadians going up on the Adriatic coast. Well, their supply lines are quite long. Even coming from sort of Bari and Brindisi, it's quite a long way, and from Taranto and all the rest of it.
Yeah,
and the priority is building up the strategic air forces. Yeah. So. By the time that the Canadians are actually getting through over the River Moro, for example, and actually into the little coastal town of Ortona, most of their battalions are already at 50%. So we always think, well, the difference between, in the Italian campaign, it might have been kind of 25 divisions against 25 divisions, but Germans had kind of only 50%. Well, that cut both ways in this, in a way that it doesn't in Northwest Europe.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, even though the Northwestern European campaigns are always characterised by, they're stuck with the mulberries and their supply lines are stretched, and that's the way that story gets told. Well, let me take you to Italy.
Yes. Exactly, because all those supply lines are not only stretched by physical distance, they're stretched by as you point out, the terrain. Which is just an absolute horror show.
Yeah, and you just look at these. I mean, the thing is, if you know how to read a road map, you can tell that a wiggly road means you're going up and down hill. It's as simple as that. And like I say, if on Google you do the layers thing where you put in the roads and the terrain, it's like, I see what the problem is now. And it's also, I mean, in a way, you look at the geography, explains why the Roman Empire is a maritime. They go north and they go around the Mediterranean by sea because Italy itself is a pain in the arse to get about. I mean, it's really, really interesting this though, because 8th Army have come from absolute calamity a year and a half, a year before, a half before. Tobruk falls on midsummer,
21st of June, 21st of
midsummer. And if you want to look at the year 42 as this sort of Janus feast, you look back to defeat, forward to victory. The fact that Tobruk falls on Midsummer's Day says so much, I think, for that sort of schism in the year. and the 8th Army then get their act together, then fight El Alamein, then go all the way to Tunisia, then invade Sicily, then invade Italy, the Italian mainland, and then are locked in this campaign. Oh, yeah, but they're a bit slow. You know,
this is a bit. I mean, if I was an Italian campaign soldier and someone said you're being a bit slow, I'd punch them in the face. I mean, I really would. I mean, it's such an insult. It really is, because it's like, well, you bloody well try it then.
Yeah.
You know, good luck with all those mines and those broken roads and those broken bridges and those windy roads which are just completely shot and being shot at all the time and shelled all the time. I mean, you know, you have a crack then.
Well, and
see
roads,
if you can do it any faster.
Roads that announce your arrival because they've got hairpin bends in them. You've got to go round the hairpin bend.
Of course, and there is no alternative. And you know, you could see that when you were going on this, you know, the route that the tanks went on their way into San Pietro in Fine. You know, you could see this road. You could see the wall, because it's cut into the side of a mountain, so it's got a wall on one side, and it's got a drop on the other.
Yeah,
there is no room for manoeuvre. Yeah. You just can't do it. And you know, and I think the other thing is, and I think this sort of touches on what you were saying, is that also 8th Army, and indeed the Americans as well, 7th Army and the people that come from 7th Army into 5th Army, the whole Allies as a whole, that they're now, the tide has turned.
Yeah.
You know, 1943 has been this big year. You know, the war in the Atlantic's been won against the U-boats. There's been the disaster for the German forces on the Eastern Front. Sicily's, you know, Tunisia's been won, this massive victory.
Yeah.
Huge victory. Then Sicily has been won with, you know, comparative ease. You know, it's been a bit of a slog because of the terrain and the conditions, all the rest of it, and, you know, stoic defense by the Germans, but they've won it in, you know, 38 days or whatever. And then you get to Italy, and they've all been told that this is going to be a cakewalk, and they're going to be walking straight into Rome and Naples, and it'll be handed over, and it'll all be fine, and the Italians are going to come on their side. It's all going to be great. We're going to put up the air forces, and it's all going to be lickety-click.
Yeah.
And suddenly it starts to piss of rain, and everywhere they go is these tiny, you know, it's mountain after mountain after mountain, you know, absolutely appalling conditions.
Yeah.
You don't know where the enemy are. You can't see all your advantages that you've been able to bring to bear. Suddenly you can't. And, you know, is it any wonder morale takes a massive dent?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I thought we were on the end game, and now we've got all this. And, you know, and you get to the top of, you get to Sant'Elia in Pianesi, and you suddenly go, God, I've got another 800 miles of this to do.
Why is it that people have got the impression this is going to be a cakewalk? How has that idea got its boots on?
Well, I think I've been a bit loose on that. I don't think they do think it's going to be a cakewalk, but I think one of the premises at the high command level is that Hitler's going to abandon Italy up to the Pisa-Rimini line because they've intercepted some ultra decrypts to that effect. So there is a general kind of confidence that we've got them on the run. You know, they've scuttled back across the Straits of Messina.
Yeah.
You know, we've had victory after victory.
So you're judging by what they've done previously. So because in the end they do leave Tunisia. In the end they do leave Sicily. For all the talk of fighting to the last round, they do bug out.
Yeah.
And isn't there also, and this is the thing that we've talked about before, and that happens again and again in Allied thinking, is you think, well, surely they can see the writings on the wall. Surely
all that. Yeah.
Surely we'd give up if we were in this situation.
Yeah, we're almost giving up anyway.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And there's that because I think what you know, there's that insight that Bradley has when he first comes to Tunisia, and he says, you know, the thing we've got wrong here, and this is him reacting to what happens at Kasserine. He says the thing we got wrong here is we did our exercises with Louisiana maneuvers, you know, these massive maneuvers that the Americans do in 41 and 42 that are reported in the newspapers as if they're battles. You know, they're literally reported on, like, you know, blue team wins. It's extraordinary where it sits in the American media. And you know, all of this, we've got to remember, all of this sits in the media, everything that's happening in new news media, new mass news media. And Bradley gets to Tunisia and goes, the mistake we've made is we've relied on umpires' judgments as to when units are done. Or when units should quit.
Yes. That's so interesting.
And he says, you know, we're actually, you know, an umpire might go, you know, might assess the situation, go, well, this is the point at which the company commander ought to surrender. but there might be a company commander who goes, I ain't surrendering for nobody. And he said, we didn't put that into our maneuvers, so we've not put it into our training, so it's not gone into how we handle in battle. But that speaks to an expectation that when things get difficult, the smart thing to do is
throw the towel in.
Throw the towel in, because you don't want to burn lives away. And just as you said earlier on, you're in this village. Why is anyone dying for this village? The reasonable assumption for all the British and Americans to look at the Duke force is to look at the Germans and go, well, no 19-year-old from Hamburg is going to spend his blood on this village. Why would he? You know, and why would his officers put him in that situation? And sometimes it comes to that simple, misapprehension of what Nazism is about.
Yeah.
Where the Germans have got themselves by this stage of the war, because they're getting more and more radicalized, obviously, partly by strategic bombing, partly by, you're in it. The Germans are in a hole, so they decide to keep digging, rather than surrender. And I think that's probably why people get to Italy and think, it'll be okay. I'd quit if I were under this kind of pressure. I'd throw in the towel because you haven't reached the point of sort of Allied escalated despondency, which again we talked about with Tammy Davis Biddle, that you get by 1944. People are thinking, oh, for Christ's sake, this has to end. Yeah. Throw the towel in, for God's sake. And that's not quite there in 43, is it? That hasn't arrived, but you do have this dip in morale because things are harder than. And it's interesting, isn't it? Is where the sort of the morale goes wrong lower down, and then gets fixed, and then goes bad higher up later on in the war, which results in escalation. I mean, the sort of the politics of late 44, 45, early 45, where people think will this war ever end? And the strategic thinking that goes into that, I think, is really, really interesting, and leads in the end to the atom bomb, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I suppose the other thing is to say is that Sicily is a really tough place and brutal place in which to fight, and there's lots of these sort of wide open valleys, and there's also lots of hills and mountain stuff, but the mountains aren't as there is nothing compared to kind of what you get in Italy. And I think the point about Sicily is you can get to a peak and you can sort of see it. You can see your end goal. You can see Etna. Etna's the kind of sort of big beacon saying, okay, come to me, come to me. In Italy, you don't have that. You've got a big range of mountains in front of you. You get across them, you get through them, you go through a gap, whatever. You climb, scale the peaks. Then there's another one.
Yeah.
And you've just got to do it all over again.
Well, there's hundreds
and all
of
the
miles
time you're
of this.
doing this, you're not making progress quick enough. Everyone knows you're not making progress quick enough. And it's raining. And it's really cold. And it's really miserable. And so your capacity for you're not getting much sleep. You're feeling put upon. Everyone knows that this hasn't been quite as successful as it might have been. So their morale's going down.
Yeah.
From a German point of view, your motive is just to kind of hold them up as long as possible.
Yeah.
And
that's relatively straightforward. Yeah.
And you know what's behind you. And you're not going to really be going forward. So you don't have to worry about what's in front of you particularly.
Yeah.
So it's a different mindset for them than it is for the attackers. It's still miserable. Don't get me wrong. But I just think attacking generally is just really hard.
Well, because
and it's really hard in that environment.
Yeah, it's really, really hard because you have to take the initiative. The defender doesn't need to bother with the initiative. It's
just all it's got to do is just defend.
It's just got to. And again, this sort of reflects into the last year of the war. The Germans have had an awful. When people say everything's too slow, the Allied effort's too slow. Germans have had an awful lot of practice at dealing with defending. At defending, they've had an awful lot of practice. The Allies coming at them. They know what to expect. They know how it's done. And one of the interesting things, obviously, is that in the last year of the war, the Allies do progress and change and mix things up and find new ways of applying stuff. They don't always proceed an attack with a barrage and all that sort of thing. They have to tinker with it.
Yeah.
Because the Germans are doing the same thing, same way, and it works. I mean, it is this sort of thing that sort of armies dream of when they get to the wide open plain and they can just roll the other side up, don't they?
Yeah.
And There aren't any.
The Golden Valley just beyond. I mean, exactly. but that's one of the tantalising things about Cassino itself, where you've got Monte Cassino, this where the monastery is, this sort of end of the spur of this mountain chain, overlooking the Liri Valley, which looks like the sort of the Golden Eden beyond, that leads to Rome. And if only you can just get past this bit, it'll all be easy going, all the rest of it. But I was also kind of really struck by following the 36th Texan Division, and obviously they're famous for what happened at the bloody Rapido, crossing the Rapido and getting slaughtered over a couple of nights. And what most people don't realise is that they are the first troops to land at Paestum on the Salerno landings. So they've got that. They get through that. Then they've got to sort of climb through, have that battle. And the Salerno battle is a significant engagement where lots of people get killed and wounded. So that's nothing. That's not a small skirmish. That's a major counterattack by the Germans, and is a really tough fight. But they win the day, so that's great. So then they push on. The next major obstacle is the River Volturno, which involves a really difficult crossing because you've got these hills rising up. They're kind of, I suppose they're mountains by our standards, but they're kind of sort of high hills, really. But then with very steep sides running down into the Volturno. So the Germans on the other side can see you coming.
Yeah.
And where they cross, there's quite a sort of noticeable plain that they've got to get across. Get across there, then they've got to get up to push on up to the Bernhard line, which is about 6 miles south of the Gustav line, which is the famous Cassino one.
Yep.
And a Bernhard line involves capturing the Mignano Gap, Monte Sammucro, the mountain village of San Pietro Infine.
Yeah.
And it takes them a week in December 1943 to do that, by which time it's pouring with rain, it's completely miserable, and lots of people are getting killed. And the famous, I was there when they brought Captain Wasco down, or whatever his name is.
Yeah.
The greatest of all Ernie Pyle dispatches.
Yeah.
Is from one of those, that's from the Texans.
Yeah.
And they finally take that. Then in January, they do the Rapido River crossing.
Yeah.
So, it's just, it's not like they've had an easy ride to the Rapido.
Yes, they're not box fresh for the Rapido, are they?
No, not at all.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, and what that all means, of course, is that they'll have had lots of replacements in. The officers, the officers, spine of officers who first landed at Salerno will have been chewed up. So you'll be. I mean, I think one of the interesting things that you've got to always bear in mind is people are in a permanent state of administrative adjustment and update, and arguably chaos. Is that not obviously you get replacement infantrymen coming in, or privates or whatever, ordinary riflemen coming through, but the officers are also being replaced all the time, and the senior NCOs, I expect, because that's who tends to get killed or injured first. So you're always in by the time they get to the Rapido, I mean, I don't know, but how many company commanders who came in at Salerno are still alive or still present? How many battalion commanders or regimental commanders? What actually has happened to that division? So it's all very well going, when they get to the Rapido, they get stitched up and it's a terrible disaster. But maybe they're not the same formation who landed in Salerno.
They're absolutely not. They definitely aren't. They're in various iterations by that stage.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing.
There is absolutely no question that the mistakes are made. This sort of, they don't use the armor, and there's all sorts of stuff that they might have done differently. And is it any different from the Volturno? I mean, everyone managed, the 3rd Division, 45th, 34th, they all managed to get across that okay. So I think it was a combination of the tragedy of the slaughter, the humiliation of not achieving it, and I think the whole kind of pointing the finger at Mark Clark is they're just looking for someone to wag that finger of anger and frustration at.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
You look at these mountains. You look at Monte Sammucro, which is overshadowing San Pietro in Infine, and it's a flipping big mountain. Your access routes are terrible.
Yeah.
They're really, really tough. really hard. You know, there's just no easy, simple way of doing this. And I think one of the reasons why everyone gets so depressed in the winter of 1943-44 is because they know that. They know that you know the conditions are worse by the rain and the snow and the cold and all the rest of it. But they also know that once they get past this, they've got another one and another chain and another chain. And it's just relentless all the way up until the kind of Po Valley. You know, what's the end goal here? What's the end point?
Well, which is why when the opportunity to take Rome comes up, you do it because it feels you need a victory. It feels like an end point. You know. And also, this campaign is about to get overshadowed, inevitably. I mean, all of that in the mix. I think it's obviously the sort of. It's interesting, though, isn't it? Because the accusations of everything of it all being too slow and all that still sort of hang in the air, don't they?
They do, yeah. It's absurd,
and it is absurd. It doesn't make any sense at all.
I'll tell you what was very interesting though was going all around the Anzio battlefield. That is quite hard work now. That's the least rewarding bit because it's so changed.
Right.
You know, it was just this sort of vast open space. I mean, the reason Aprilia is called the factory is because it's so small. They think it is a factory.
Right.
You know, when they look at it on the map, and it's a new town. It's only been opened by Mussolini in the model town. It's opened in 1938.
Right.
So it's kind of brand spanking new, really, and it hasn't expanded, of course, because then the war's come along.
Yeah.
So it's literally just this sort of blot on the kind of, you know, in the flat landscape, and it looks from the maps and it looks from everything. It's more like a factory than anything else. So it gets known as the factory.
The factory.
Well, it's now it's absolutely, you know, there is no let up in the kind of, you know, conurbation between Anzio and Duno and Aprilia and Cisterna and Latina and all the rest of it. It's just constant, and it's all been, you know, there's this famous thing called the overpass, or the underpass, where you look at it, which was over a railway line, and that structure is still there.
Yeah,
and in the photos from 1944, it's just this overpass in a kind of barren landscape, and now it's just totally covered in houses and garages. Light industry and, you know.
Yes, that's one of the before and afters you said, where you said this one's tougher to, you know, it's not so good because it's changed so much.
Yeah.
Whereas completely. All the mountain villages are basically the same, aren't they?
Yeah.
I mean, they've got cars in them now, larger cars. Yeah. They've got cars in them, but that's about it, isn't it?
Yeah.
For that sort of eternal lifestyle, it would seem. Well,
the wonder really is why anyone lives there, though, because it's not an attractive part of Italy at all.
Oh, you go there to write a novel, don't you?
What, Anzio? I tell you what, we did.
Oh, not Anzio. No, I meant in the, you know, like up in the hills.
Oh, in the hills, yeah, obviously, yeah. That's a different kettle of fish. But what was really interesting is we found this. I tell you, he was completely brilliant. Paul Reed.
Mm. Oh, really?
At Somcourt.
Oh, brilliant. Paul's fantastic.
Yeah, he was completely fantastic. I hadn't appreciated that his father was at Anzio. And he sent me his father's account, which was just fascinating. It was really, really interesting. Yeah. And anyway, I said, you know, where are the best places to see the wadis and all this sort of stuff? And he came back with all sorts of lists. And he said, you must go to this place. And so I kind of, I went to it. It was this tiny little windy road. Absolutely nothing on. There was a sort of abandoned hazelnut plantation. Right. And just overlooking the hazelnut plantation was this little square on there of grass and a round stone with an inscription on, and then a single olive tree coming out of it.
Yeah.
And that was created by Roger Waters of Pink Floyd.
Really?
For his dad,
really?
Eric Fletcher Waters,
right.
Who had been a conscientious objector.
Yeah.
At the beginning of the war, and in the Communist Party, and was you know, really, really left wing and everything. And then decided as the war progressed that actually, you know, what he needed to do was stand up and fight against Nazism and all the rest of it, and fascism. So he joined up, ended up at Anzio, and got there just a few days before the Operation Fish Fang, which was the German counterattack. And he was just straight in the firing line of the German counterattack, you know, which included Tiger tanks and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
And he was killed, and his body was never identified.
Right. Gosh, I didn't know that.
suddenly you kind of start to understand the Wall a little bit better. And,
yeah.
You know, and all that Pink Floyd stuff that they were doing. You know.
Yeah. Oh, fascinating. Where's that?
It's in the Anzio Bridgehead, but it's in what's known as the Waddies. It's this really weird thing because so you have this bit. It's all pretty flat, and then suddenly you've got this bit of really weird, tight undulations.
Yeah.
And so, from a kind of, if you're on the plateau, it looks completely flat still, but it isn't. Yeah. And there's all these little very narrow and quite steep, not terribly deep, sort of 20, 30 feet deep.
Yeah.
Little sort of tunnels and waterways.
Interesting.
That sort of look like sort of roots of a branch. They're all in this one particular area, and that's where the British part are. That's where the British are.
Oh, right, okay.
And they're facing kind of up towards the Alban Hills.
Yeah.
And that's the road from Campoleone through to Aprilia, the factory, and then further south, runs straight into the Waddy system, which is where all the British are. And the leading elements just get completely overrun by this. Yeah. But then do kind of hold out. And Eric Fletcher Waters, who is Roger Waters' father, is one of the casualties in that. And when you hear about British accounts of Anzio, that's really what they're talking about. Is that counterattack in February, which only lasts kind of a few days, and is held, and that kind of trench warfare because of the waddies are like trenches.
Yeah. Yes, I can see it on the terrain map now.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting. Yeah. And he sent me a fantastic photograph of taken of the day, from the day of the Waddy system. It was incredible. So excellent. I was very grateful to him, and it was fascinating to see because, of course, I kind of knew about Roger Waters and his kind of obsession with the Second World War and everything, but I just.
Oh, excellent. Well, I think Jim,
I hadn't known the story.
I think we've probably done your holiday snaps now, haven't we?
Yeah, we have. We must we must talk about your Red Army conundrum next time. We'll do that next time.
We'll talk about that next time.
Next time. But generally, the book going well and everything?
Oh, it seems to be, yes. With some a very nice signing on Saturday in Sheffield.
Very good.
Got more this week. I'm in Ipswich on Thursday. Then Waterstones at 1:00 on Friday.
Great.
In Northampton. Brilliant. And then Crewe on Saturday at 3:30, I think. And then Woking on Sunday.
Nice.
At 3:30. So we're yes, I'll be glad handling any independent company member who wants to say hello. I'm not doing drawings though. We've established that.
No cricket pitches, no Spitfires.
No Spitfires.
No Sherman tanks.
No cricket pitches, no Sherman tanks. You're a good draftsman, Jim. I can't draw to save my life. So, we've all got to play to our strengths. I did write a lot of Bring Up the Piats when I was at Coles. It was to bring up the Piat and Achtung that were in direct competition with each other. And I had to explain to one of the women in Coles who was helping, this lovely woman from Panama, what a Piat was. And independent company members and fans of this podcast will recognise the glazing over that occurred during that explanation.
Yeah, I need to perfect a Piat drawing. I did a Sherman on Sunday in Berwick-upon-Tweed. And,
well done.
I didn't feel it was quite up to my normal standards. I'm not going to lie. Out of practice.
It's funny. Excellent. Okay, well, thanks everyone for listening. We have got some stuff coming for you in the form of podcasts about El Alamein. Yes,
Alamein week next week.
Alamein week next week, which we've got to record this week. So we'll be eyes down on that. Thank you very much for listening. We will see you all again very soon. Cheerio.